Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Was Raised by Villains? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Arc 1. Episode 1. Beginnings aren't always easy. Inspired by XXX. Story warnings. Suicidal thoughts, tensions, self-harm, depression, social anxiety triggers, kidnapping, torture, mental emotional psychological and physical abuse. Please enjoy. Drip, drop, plip, plop, splat, pitter-patter. Boom! Emerald eyes flashed open, the male form quivering and shaking. He muttered something along the lines of being cold, but it was quickly forgotten due to the chattering of his clanking teeth and his entire body shivering in a sad attempt to warm itself. He clutched the extremely thin blanket on his shoulders and brought it closer to himself, desperate for any kind of warmth. His usually soft, bouncy, green curly hair was sopping wet and matted in various places, creating a rough texture, and when was the last time he had a proper shower or bath? He couldn't smell himself, nor could he smell the horrid garbage around him. He couldn't even smell his own blood anymore, or smell daisies. He couldn't smell anything other than death, blood, and infection of a wound. He could only smell what his masters trained him to. Everything else was dull and had almost no smell or no smell at all. He could faintly smell the detergent his mother used on his clothes when he was smaller, but even that too was extremely faint. A loud clap of thunder made the male shrink further into his blanket and against the rough texture of the bricks that dug into the scarred skin of his back. His green eyes pleaded for the people walking in and out of the bar to release him from the chain on his left foot that kept him bound to this wall behind the garbage cans with the makeshift cardboard shelter, and most importantly, behind the electric fence surrounded by barbed wire on the bottom and top. The electricity was cut off due to the rain, but everything else was very real. He looked down and refused to release a whimper when there was yet another deafening boom of thunder. Izuku. His head slowly looked upwards, his eyes catching familiar red ones. He knew whose those belonged to, and he wished to some god above that a void would open beneath him and he'd fall into it, and be done with this world. His emerald orbs scanned the red ones, looking for any hint of what was going to happen between them. His black hair was styled almost exactly like his, only except his was more nicely kept and not grown out. His curls were held down by a black beanie, sporting some big-name hero or an actor from a movie. He had on all black, only his red fingerless gloves and equally red t-shirt were the only colors in his outfit. When someone says your name, you answer boy. The man snarled at the younger, only to gain a nod and a meek, "I'm sorry, father," in response. The man scoffed and looked away, reminding him of his childhood friend, who typically did the same thing when he got mad or upset. Get the F up and wipe that pitiful look off you demon face. You have a mission, so get presentable. The man growled before entering the fenced-in corral and releasing the boy from his chains. The boy walked past the man and entered the bar, walking to the back and opening the door and seeing the blue-haired male he had come to loathe. "I'm here, master," he said as he kneeled to the floor, his head downwards, showing what little respect he had to so he could live to see the next day. The boy scoffed. "Get off your knee, you little brat." He did as told and looked the male in the eyes. "I want you to kill the hero killer Stain. You know the drill, no witnesses, no overly gross scene, and no running off. Otherwise, your little friend and mother are as good as dead. He's in Hosu City, you're to go there immediately. No detours and no stopping. Understood?" The male nodded, muttering a yes sir under his breath. "Go take a fing shower before you leave. At this rate, he'll smell you before he sees you." He perked his head up at the word shower, wondering if he'll get his meal today too, but of course, Shigaraki dismissed him, leaving him half-satisfied. He walked up the stairs and let his feet take him to the small bathroom at the end of the hall. He stepped in, making sure he used only the cold water as he was supposed to. He shivered even more, and let his imagination wander as he washed himself. He let him imagine a life where he was trained under his idol All Might, and where his childhood friend and him were rivals, and how it would be like if he never was kidnapped by his villainous father. A violent shiver ran down his spine, and his body burned of discomfort and the sheer coldness. He stepped out and rubbed himself dry with a towel, and grabbed a comb and combed his hair how his master told him to for missions. He grimaced. Master, that still sounded so wrong no matter how many times he said it. It made him loathe the man even more. He put down the comb and used his toothbrush to brush his teeth as well, and he put on his work uniform. It was simple, a black hoodie and leggings with his signature crimson-red shoes and black medical mask along with his red fingerless gloves, identical to his father's. Of course, it was all stolen, and of course, it was all dictated by Shigaraki Master. Another harsh shiver ran down his spine, and he wished he had a shirt underneath the sweatshirt, and the plea went upon deaf ears. He opened the door and walked down the stairs, grabbing his dagger and a few throwing knives, along with the envelope of money, and left. He flipped the hood upwards, and walked to the train station. He took off his red gloves and removed his black medical mask with a normal blue one. He had to look normal and act normal, something that he wished wasn't a facade. His trembling fingers opened the envelope, and grabbed the money, then folded the envelope into two and tossed it into the trash bin. He counted it out in his head, jumped at yet another clap of thunder, then came up with the number 20. He took a shaky breath. The train tickets only costed 5, so that left 10 to spare. He thought of a quick trip to the nearest fast food joint, but quickly decided against it. Someone probably put the extra 10 in there to F with him, and quite frankly, if he was in a higher position he would definitely kick someone's butt. With a strangled growl, he looks up to find himself at the train. He hands the man the money and gets a ticket in return. He walked onto the train, only getting stopped by a guard, in which he acted as if he were sick. "Terribly sorry, sir," he broke off into a coughing fit, not giving himself enough time to breathe, and held himself against a pole. The guard seemed to be pitying him, and he pushed him a glass of water, in which Izuku hesitantly accepted and drank. He ceased his fake coughing fit and wheezed. "I've got a terrible cold, terrible, I say." He shook his head. "Boss is making me work today, and he knows I don't have a car and I'm in the middle of a move." He cut himself off when the guard placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry about it. I'm sorry that I stopped you, please continue." Izuku nodded and walked onto the train, and made sure to release a few coughs before the doors closed. He sat down on the train, seeing an old man in a hero's outfit a couple seats ahead. He looked out the window, only to see a large explosion at Hosu City. His shoulders dropped, and he released a small feral growl. "Goddamn that blue-haired bastard. Didn't Master know it was going to be hell for him to complete the mission without being identified now?" He saw a Nomu in the distance and quickly replaced the blue medical mask with the black one and put on his red fingerless gloves. He saw a child in the way and grabbed it and rolled away from the huge hole the Nomu had made on the train. Screams erupted around him and he flinched inwardly, his anxiety bubbling in the pits of his stomach making him nauseous. He released the child, who cried out in pain, which made Izuku look down, seeing a small burn on his leg. He took out his medical mask and tied it around the burn, blocking it from any dirt that might get into it and make it extremely painful. "It's okay, but do you know where your mom is?" The boy looked around and pointed at a lady freaking out. "All right, I'm going to crawl behind you, to make sure you don't get hurt, and tell your mommy about me when I'm not behind you, okay?" The little boy nodded, and walked over to his mother, Izuku shadowing him, before he poked the boy and jumped out of the moving train, hearing screams erupt and a little boy screaming, "He saved my wife." A smile broke out on Izuku's face before returning to its natural stoic one. He landed hard and immediately rolled to release the momentum from his fall. A small pain in his ankle warned him to not pull another stunt like that again, but Izuku was already on top of a building and jumping to another rooftop. He scanned for the hero killer, only to catch him with two others in an alleyway. Izuku climbed down silently, and then once halfway down, he jumped down, creating a thud. The hero killer turned towards the young boy, who in return stared back. "Who are you?" Izuku walked out of the shadows, his eyes flickering a dangerous shade of red as small flames danced on his hands. And a random cardboard box was suddenly at the hero killer's feet. "I think you know who I am." Izuku's tone was laced with venom. The hero killer let out a laugh. So the League of Villains sent a kid to do their dirty work? How cute. Izuku walked towards the hero killer, stopping only a few feet away. We both know I maybe have a child's body, but I'm nowhere near that innocence or normalcy, he said, casting a glance to an unknown pro-hero and what seemed a smaller ingenium. Izuku quickly pieced together this must be the younger brother, because the pro-hero had a spinal cord injury and couldn't move. Shaking the thought from his mind, he looked over to hero killer. That's true about a lot of kids these days, assassin. At the sound of his code name, the green-haired boy scoffed and looked upwards. What did you do to PSS my master off? He wants me to kill you and ordered no witnesses, so this must be really getting to him. His emerald eyes grazed over the hero killer's stature. Just told the kid the truth. Izuku let out something between a scoff and a chuckle before locking eyes with Stain and his eyes growing a deep red. That's your downfall. The hero killer's eyes widened before he jumped back, his body formerly where Izuku's kunai was. Fast reflexes. The kunai created a spark and suddenly a large fire surrounded them, a smirk on Izuku's face as he stalked forwards, standing in front of the heroes with his hands in his hoodie pocket. Trial by fire? Izuku's eyes flashed with insanity. You are the bane of villains. We're supposed to take back what order there was. Izuku scoffed. You're a effing idiot if you think I do this for myself. The fire burned brighter and it seemed that the walls grew. Flames liked the side of the buildings, releasing a hefty amount of smoke. Izuku took out a dagger and as Stain charged, he moved. His dagger cut into the soft flesh of the man's stomach, and the sword grazed Izuku's cheek. When he went to turn around, he couldn't. Panic rushed through his body. It bubbled throughout his entire being and he struggled to move. He was desperate, and he refused to die before he could see his mother and nameless friend again. He tried to move again, but it was agonizing, and when he felt the cold metal against his lower back, he let out a shaky sigh. He thought of his mother, how she'd get a call that they found her son that had been missing for 9 years and that he had been a C-ranked criminal. She'd see the scars that littered his body and she'd see her lover's name carved in the middle of his back, and she'd see the countless scars he left himself. She'd see all the parts of him that died, and that friend of his that didn't have a name or face, the one with blonde hair. He'd see it too. He'd see his friend's body lying in the alleyway, and probably blame himself for letting his father take the boy. He probably already did. Any last words? The man asked. Izuku closed his eyes tighter, his body preparing for the strike that was yet to come. There's too many for me to say. I just wished I had lived to see my mother and childhood friend. See how they are and get out of this hell. Izuku forgot about the heroes and the kid. He forgot that he was about to die, and the only thing that clouded his mind was the ash-blonde hair that didn't have a face or name attached to it. A harsh chuckle left the man's lips and Izuku felt the feeling come back into his toes. He thought back to how the paralyzation happened after he was grazed by the sword and he mentally cursed himself out. Paralyzation quirk by using blood? Why didn't he see it earlier? He gripped the dagger in his hand. Stain, have you ever felt alone? The coldness of the sword no longer pressed into him. Why do you ask that? The gruff voice replied. Izuku huffed. I mean, all villains are usually alone, or have some feeling of being alone, so I just wanted to see if you felt like that. There was a brief silence, and Izuku felt his entire body beating the numbness, and suddenly, once his entire body grew warm again, he brought up a firewall between them and flipped backwards. His legs grabbed onto the man's neck, and he brought his head down to the pavement below, and Izuku was winded. He got up and scrambled backwards, fishing out his throwing knives. Suddenly there was a boy standing in front of him. Half white hair and half red. A snicker would have came from Izuku's throat except he was in a dangerous situation that demanded him to be serious. With a feral growl he grabbed his throwing knives and peeked out from behind the person in his way and flicked his wrist, burying his knife into the man's stomach. The man slumped against the wall, and Izuku stood up. Everyone looking at him in bewilderment. He shrugged his shoulders. What? I'm the assassin here. He muttered and crossed his arms. You're the assassin from the League of Villains. The half-and-half boy pointed out. Izuku rolled his eyes and put a hand over his chest, with a mock expression of surprise. "What? No," he said sarcastically before flicking his wrists in a dismissal motion. "You better get out of here. I really don't feel like killing 3 people today, despite my master's orders to take out all witnesses." He stalked over to the corpse of his victim when a wall of ice encased him. A shiver rolled down his spine and he went to activate his quirk when it wouldn't work. He rolled his eyes. "Please let me out. I really don't feel like getting hypothermia and explaining it to my boss." The half-and-half boy shook his head and made the floor of the little tank ice, and the top was covered in ice. He was in a can of FING ice, and he couldn't activate his quirk in such a state. Another shiver rolled down his spine, followed by another and another and another until the poor boy was quivering and sinking into his hoodie. "Congrats, you caught someone who won't be alive tomorrow," he muttered under his breath. This was going to be so bad. Izuku had woken up to being in HCFFS and sitting at a table. Of course the HCFFS made sure it suppressed his quirk so he couldn't use it, but he wouldn't anyway. He had been changed out of his blood-soaked clothes and into a hoodie and sweatpants, and he had socks on his feet, and he got to keep his red sneakers. He lifted the hoodie up to see a green all-might shirt, and he had to keep his head leveled so he didn't geek out. Despite Shigarata Master hating the symbol of peace, Izuku found comfort in his large smile and words of comfort. Especially his catchphrase, "I am here." He put the hoodie down and stood up, looking around the room like an animal in their new habitat. Curiously, he poked the food on the table, not sure if it was for him or poisoned. He saw a variety of drinks besides the sandwich and small slice of cheesecake. It was a soda, coffee, and water. He swallowed the lump in his throat, hesitantly reaching out for the water, and opening it with a small crack. He jumped and looked around, fearful that whoever put it here would be furious if he opened or drank it. When no one came to scold him, he sniffed the water. Smelling nothing out of the ordinary, he poured some water in the cap and looked around for some paper. He found some and looked over it, his blood running cold when he saw a younger version of himself under the large words "missing." How did they find out? He grabbed the missing photo in anger and panic and walked back to the interrogation table. He put the paper down and poured a tiny bit of water over it, only seeing the ink blend together and the paper becoming flimsy and wet. He poked it and jerked his hand away when he felt the familiar coldness of water. Nothing burned, nothing stood out of the ordinary, but he put the cap back on the bottle. It could be that tasteless, scentless, and colorless poison Kurogiri always talked about. He put his head on top of his folded arms, deciding to take a nap, and that he would try to resist the temptation of eating or drinking anything. After all, they could get his DNA like that and could officially say he is the missing boy, Midoriya Izuku, or was that even his name? Aizawa and Naomasa watched the young boy with great interest. He made sure the water wasn't acid or poison, and even then he didn't eat it or drink it. He's severely underweight and dehydrated, and yet he doesn't drop everything and tear all of it up. Naomasa looked at the underground hero with sadness. He's been tortured, hasn't he? I mean, we both saw all of those scars and the name Hisashi on his back, so there isn't a doubt in my mind, but Aizawa, he's only 15. Eraserhead stood silently, watching the boy's breathing as he slowly fell into a light sleep. Ida was right. This boy has been through a lot to the point he may not be able to live a normal life. Naomasa turned and looked at him with surprise. Are you implying Dash? If Nedzu allows me to, I'll mentor the kid myself. However, this kid needs a safe place to stay, and Yui might grant that. He'd be a good fit for Class 1A, after all, we have an extra seat. Aizawa shrugged, a small smile playing upon his lips. They watched as the boy slowly stirred, and finally opened his eyes, looking around curiously once more. Let's do the interrogation, yeah? When Izuku woke up for the 3rd time that day, he felt sluggish and uncomfortable. He came up with the conclusion that he slept past his normal 5 hours, and his body was slowly wanting to sleep more. He looked around, wondering where he was, and saw the food and spilt water in front of him and instantly remembered. He cursed his illness and looked up when he heard a door opening. He leaned back into the chair and released one of his feral growls, earning a chuckle in return. His tough guy facade fell away and left him in his vulnerable state. He released the tension in his shoulders and looked upwards through the messy green mop of his hair. He saw two males enter, both with dark hair. One had a scarf and the other had a trench coat and a hat to match. He slunk further into the chair, something he did upon habit, and once again today wished he could disappear. I'm Tsukachi Naomesa, and this is Aizawa. We're assigned to your case. Izuku perked up at the mention of Aizawa. He's the underground hero Eraserhead. Izuku mumbled clear enough for the two men to hear. Now, can you tell us your name, assassin? Izuku looked upwards, a skeptical look on his face. You already know who I am, he said, looking away and out the barred window of the building. Well, we have our suspicions of who you are, but you're really good at keeping things you want to yourself. Izuku sat up and put his cuffed hands on the table. His eyes scanned the others, looking for any intentions for harm, and found none. As much as I want to, I can't. My master would kill me if he found out I told a hero and a detective who I was. A brief silence fell in the room, and the two men sat down. We are going to protect you. Just tell us what your name is and what happened. Izuku looked up and stared them in the eyes, and he looked down, tears blossoming in his emerald eyes. I am Midoriya Izuku, the boy that's been missing for 9 years, and I am assassin. I was kidnapped by my father and unwillingly working for the League of Villains for 8 years. That first year I stayed with them was torture and abuse. They threatened my mother's safety and my childhood friends. Every time I tried to run or tell someone, they would strap me down to a table and put a old blood-smelling cloth to my face and poured water over my face. Izuku looked down, the memories of it resurfacing, and tears streamed down his face like rivers. I can't even remember my own mother or my friends. All I know is that she smelled like daisies, and I can't even smell anymore. They made sure the only things I could smell were blood and infections. God. Izuku folded his arms and put his head in his arms, crying loudly. Sobs racked through his body, and when he stopped he looked upwards. They treated me like I was some animal. I was kept in a fenced-in part of the alleyway behind garbage, and the only shelter I had was a flimsy cardboard structure, like a box turned on its side. They would keep me outside chained to that demed wall until they needed me. That's when I'd get food or a shower. I only got both when they hadn't fed me in almost 3 weeks and hadn't showered in 5. I even had to pee and sheet in the fenced-in area. God, please don't make me go back. Master will kill me. He'll kill him and my mother too. If Sensei gives him the order, he'll do it. Another sob racked through the young male, and the two men sat in silence, scared to say anything that might change the male. We have a few questions for you, Midoriya, but if they bring up any bad memories, then don't push it, okay? The green-haired boy scoffed and sniffled before looking upwards with a sad smile. Whatever questions you ask will give me my freedom, my mother and friends' freedom, and I will gladly dig up my bad memories to keep them safe. The detective gave him a sad smile. How did your dad kidnap you? Izuku essayed in a sharp breath. I only remember bits and pieces, but I do know I went willingly. He said he had something to show me, that mother wasn't happy with him and I shouldn't tell her. My friend tried telling me that it was fishy, but I didn't listen, and when my father said something that made me scared, I ran to my friend only to be dragged into a warp gate. I can still remember his screams for me to bite them and run or something. I was so scared I didn't know what to do. The detective wrote everything down that Izuku said, and it made him scared. Anxious. Please don't write it down. They'll realize I was captured and they'll come for me. He fiddled with his thumbs and bit his lip. I just can't go back. I won't write anything down, you're okay? So, what do you remember about that friend of yours and your mom? Izuku smiled. I remember my mom's name was Inko, and she had green hair and emerald eyes and smelled like daisies. I don't really remember anything else, other than she cooked for me and I loved it. My friend, all I remember is crimson eyes and ash blonde hair and that it's a boy, but I don't remember his name or what his quirk was or if he even had a quirk. Aizawa nodded. You were quirkless? Izuku's blood ran cold. Sensei can give people quirks. I was given mine during my first year there. I don't remember what he looks like or where he was. Hell, if I gave you the address of the bar, they are probably gone. You wouldn't find anything. If I don't come back after 2 hours, they leave. I don't know where they go but they leave. The two nodded, and Aizawa looked at the green-haired boy. What if we brought in your friend and your mother? Surprised, happy, shocked tear-filled green eyes stared at them, flickering between the two before letting out a happy sob. Please. Arc 1. Episode 2. Keep family close and your enemies closer. Inspired by XXXXX. Ring. Pring. Ring. Midoriya Inko had looked over to the small coffee table, seeing her cell phone ringing and a name so familiar that her heart stopped. With tears in her eyes, she knew this was the call she had been either waiting for or dreading for. She reached her plump hand out shakily and grabbed the phone. She answered the call and pressed it to her ear. Mrs. Midoriya, we found him alive. Oh my God! Inko collapsed to the floor, sobbing in relief. They had found him, they had found her baby boy. After 9 years of God knows what, he's finally safe. Finally out of Hisashi's grip. He's a little shaken up, and he's not the same happy boy he once was. He's been through a lot, but when he was given the option, he said he wanted to see you tomorrow. Also, he mentioned something about having an ash-blonde friend and requested him to be there as well. Overall, his mental state is pretty bad, but nothing therapy and a safe school can fix. The principal of Yui allowed him to attend his school in the hero course, if you want. I'll call you with more on the subject. Have a wonderful day, Mrs. Midoriya, and congratulations. The call was ended and Inko stormed out of her apartment and ran up the stairs to her family friend's door. She knocked on the door to have an ash-blonde female with spiky hair standing there. Inko, she said incredulously. Inko looked upwards, her hand covered over her mouth and walked in, to the living room where another spiky-haired blonde sat. His red eyes looked over at his aunt, and his mouth fell open. Auntie Inko? He said as he shot off the couch towards the small plump woman. Katsuki Mitsuki, they found him. They found my baby. She wailed happily and hugged the shocked blonde male. Tears came to his eyes, but he blinked them away. He didn't need to cry right now. Auntie Inko was doing enough of that for the both of them. He let out a relieved huff, which turned into a relieved smile, which turned into a huge group hug and lots of crying. His father eventually came home, heard the news, and cried with the three as well. There was going to be no more late nights wondering if the boy was okay. There was going to be no more doubts, no more pain of waiting if the call would come that he would show up dead. There would be no more what-ifs or the imagination of a funeral of a boy they hardly knew anymore. There would be a chance to give the boy an amazing life, the life he should have had, and Katsuki would be dead if he'd let his temper get in the way of seeing his childhood friend. He'd be dead. Izuku sat silently as the nice man before him was consistently trying to get him to eat. I'm not going to eat, you moron. Izuku huffed and laid his head down on his folded arms, looking up at the bewildered man. Why? Izuku tensed at the question and looked away. Because I don't effing want to, you imbecile. Izuku growled and his eyes flashed a red, making the man back off a little. Until his wonderful stomach let out a growl. You not wanting to is a lie. You're obviously hungry. I said I'm not going to eat. Izuku had stood up suddenly, the chair crashing against the brick wall, and his eyes a deep red. In a silent narrowing of his eyes, Izuku practically challenged the terrified man to push him any further. Why didn't this man understand the words no and not? His stomach may be growling, but just because his body protested didn't mean he'll go against his master's rules. These people may be nice, but if they found out everything about him they'll be disgusted, just like the villains. They would treat him just like they did, and he didn't know if he could handle that. He didn't know if he could handle a hug from his mother and someone who was just blonde hair and red eyes. He didn't know if he could wake up his mother screaming due to the nightmares that plagued his mind. He didn't know if he could even act normal anymore, and here this man is trying to get him to do something that he didn't even know could be life-threatening. This man didn't know a single DMN thing about him, and here he was playing nice with him. Midoriya, you really need to eat. He didn't know how, but he snapped and suddenly had the man against the wall. His right hand was tight around the man's throat, and Izuku could feel the flames liking his lips, waiting for him to command them like dogs. He heard the man choking for air, and felt his nails dig into his hand, but it only made the boy smirk. Do you really think you can escape me? Pathetic, really. Izuku grinned, and when he was tackled to the floor, it was like a fog cleared in his mind. He looked around, scared, and when his eyes fell upon the man with a growing bruise on his neck, Izuku knew what he had done. With whimpers flowing out of his mouth, he backed himself into a corner and brought his knees up to his chest, tears flowing out of his eyes. Did these people really think he could become a hero? He had too much stress, too many demons. He couldn't function properly anymore, and they wanted him to attend a school for the brightest and happiest students? He would be the wolf among the lambs. He would be the risk that they took just because he needed a place to keep him from his master. He felt a hand on his shoulder and he let out a yelp, and fire was suddenly surrounding the boy. The hand jerked away, and there was a pained grunt. Izuku looked downwards, his vision tunneling, and he could only feel himself hyperventilating. His fire somehow dying, and he felt a hand, a small voice that he barely heard was calling his name. His vision failing him, he decided to focus everything he could into hearing this voice. Breathe in. Somehow his fragile mind allowed him to piece together he needed to breathe and count to 10. He breathed in shakily and counted to 10 before breathing out, then inhaling to 10, then exhaling at another 10. His vision returned, blurry due to the tears, and finally he could breathe. He could see. He looked upwards to see the man he hurt, to see him having his hand on his shoulder, and crouched down to Izuku's eye level, and on his left hand was a second-degree burn. The smell of burned flesh filled Izuku's nose, and tear welled up in his wide emerald-green eyes. You're okay, Izuku. I won't push you to eat anymore. You're okay here, you're safe. Izuku shook his head, his mind swirling with possibilities and the very fact he hurt someone who was trying to help him. Or was he? How was Izuku sure that these people weren't working for Master? How was he sure that this wasn't just some test? With a panicked head and heart, Izuku stood up and ran. He ran to the opposite side of the room, into a corner. Corners were always the safest. No one could see him in a corner. When the therapist stood up and looked over at Izuku, he felt his heart stop. Izuku no doubt had borderline personality disorder and paranoid personality disorder. The man looked at Tsukachi with sad eyes and shook his head. There was no way he could see his mother and friend right now. If they said one thing that could set him off, it could be catastrophic. He turned his head back to the young male. Izuku, we're going to leave now, okay? The boy barely nodded, and when they made their way across the room, Izuku paralleled them, and by the time they were at the door, the freckled-faced teen was at the other end of the room. The two men left, and once outside, the therapist looked at Tsukachi. Call the mother and friend, and let me talk to them while they watch him from the two-way window. I'll tell them he's too unstable right now. Whatever boy you met yesterday, Tsukachi, he's not the boy we're seeing today. Tsukachi looked at the boy, a frown settled on his features. I'll go call them now. The detective said sadly and walked to his desk. He sat down and reached for the phone and held it to his ear. He hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and dialed the number he knew all too well. When Tsukachi Naomasa called Inko Midoriya the next day after telling her son was okay, she was in the Bakuga residence. She had picked up the phone, not knowing what was going on. Mrs. Midoriya? By the tone in his voice, Inko almost cried at that moment. Yes, detective? She answered shakily. She looked upwards, seeing Mitsuki and Masaru looking at her sadly. If you want to visit your son, we need you at the station. We have something to discuss about him. Inko let out an equally shaky breath and tears instantly welled up in her eyes. Can I bring his friend? She asked, knowing Katsuki would want to go. I suggest bringing his parents or guardians if he were to come, but yes. Inko bit her lip and a few tears slipped from her eyes. All right, we'll be there within 5 minutes. The detective said something, then bid her a goodbye and hung up. Inko looked at Mitsuki. Something's wrong with him. They said if he were to come you also needed to be there. The Bakugas nodded and called for their son, who bounded down the steps, an unusual bright smile on his face. Are we going to see Izuku? He asked excitedly, but his happiness was short-lived when he saw Inko's tears. What's going on? What happened to Deku? He asked his parents. We don't know, but it's not good. They had piled into the car, and the car ride was silent. When they got there, They parked and entered the building, seeing criminals hauled off to different places and police everywhere. Tsukachi was waiting for them and introduced himself as the lead detective on his case. Katsuki's eyes widened as he saw Aizawa beside him, and the other did the same. "Why are you here?" Katsuki snapped. Aizawa looked at Inko and pursed his lips. "I am the lead hero assigned to the assassin case, and it turned out your son was the assassin for the League of Villains." "Bullshit. Deku wouldn't join villains. He was hellbent on becoming a hero, more so than I was, and he didn't even have a DM in quirk." Katsuki exploded and took a step forward, eyeing his homeroom teacher. Aizawa wasn't fazed. "I'll explain more when we see him." Inko, already in tears, nodded. Her baby boy had killed people? What had possibly made him do such a thing? Silence was filled in the group for many reasons, but one was that they were all afraid to ask. They were led to an interrogation room, to the other side of the window, where they saw a small boy around 166 centimeters tall with long bangs and equally long hair that went to right above his shoulders. It was tangled and matted, but you could see the curls and the green hair. He had on a green all-might shirt and a gray hoodie tied around his waist. He was facing the window, his arms were a little more muscular than what Katsuki remembered, and God was the boy underweight. It wasn't that he looked like a stick, but you could just tell the boy wasn't properly fed. A shocked gasp came from Auntie Inko, and Katsuki knew why. His arms were littered with pale white scars. The most noticeable was extremely pale and in the middle of his left arm in the back. His arm looked a little off, and Katsuki felt sick because he knew what that wound meant. Someone had broken his arm, then did a poor job of putting it back together again. Katsuki couldn't imagine the agonizing pain of his bone being broken. Then, as if on a silent cue, the boy turned around and walked closer to the window. Katsuki could feel his face grow hot. Whether it was from anger or something else, he didn't know. The boy squinted at the deceiving window. He put his hand to the glass, and Katsuki could clearly see the marks and scars on the palm and the self-harm cuts that littered both his arms. His face was what made Katsuki tear up and hold his hand to his mouth to keep himself from screaming. His eyes were the same green, but along his throat was a scar directly across. Then there was a horizontal scar going across his left eye, a scar across the bridge on his nose, and another, deep pale scar on his right cheek, going from the corner of his eye to his jaw in an almost straight line. Suddenly, his eyes grew to a deep crimson, and his throat emitted an orange color. He opened his mouth, and flames mixed with smoke flowed out of his mouth. Suddenly, he pulled the flames from his mouth out with a flicker of movement with his wrist, and with his flames he wrote the word water. Tsukachi looked to a guard who nodded and went to the door. He opened it and walked through. In his hands he had a water bottle. Izuku looked at the man with shock and distrust. He let out a chilling growl, which made the man put his hands in the air. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're safe. I'm just going to put the water on the table." "No?" Katsuki's shocked eyes grew wider and his hand fell from his mouth. His voice wasn't innocent and sweet as it was when they were kids. It was filled with suspicion, weariness, and distrust. Maybe mixed with anger, but it was shocking. The Midoriya Izuku he knew wouldn't ever speak to someone like that. Especially with so much venom. "You leave it there and leave? Or do you want to have a missing limb? I'm not against hurting you like I did the other man. Do you need a reminder?" Izuku's flames grew, and the man shook his head. Tsukachi leaned forward, pressing a button, and leaning towards a mic. "Midoriya, you wouldn't want to do that in front of your mom and friend, right?" Katsuki felt his heart drop. Did Deku not remember him? Izuku's stance lightened, but was still in a fighting stance. "Izuku, if you hurt this man, you won't be allowed to see your mother and friend." It was a different man who stepped into the room, a dark bruise around his neck and a burned wrist. Izuku's eyes widened, then he looked to the floor. He flames slowly dying out until they were no more. Suddenly, Izuku looked to the window and his eyes widened. He rushed forwards and put his hand where Inko's was, and where Katsuki was. Katsuki's eyes burned from tears. "Mom? Kaken?" Izuku's eyes were filled with tears and Katsuki felt himself smile happily. "Who else would it be, you idiot?" Katsuki joked, making the boy release his tears. "It's me, baby." It's Mama, Inko said, crying just as hard as Katsuki and Izuku. The man in the room with the wounds stepped forward and stood beside Izuku a little bit away from the green-haired boy. I conducted a test, and Izuku isn't in the best state. I'm afraid to say he has borderline personality disorder and paranoid personality disorder. I'll work with him every moment I get, but until further notice, he'll have to be kept in this room, and our meeting for now will be through the glass. He just isn't stable enough for anyone to be around him yet. The man gestured to his neck and wrist, and Izuku's eyes looked downwards, and he stepped away from the glass, his hands dropping as well. The man quickly left the room and showed up beside the group. He was found by 2 of Yui's students in Hosu City. He was the one who killed the hero killer Stain, and he took countless lives. He'll have to face a trial, like everyone else. However, knowing he's the missing boy and was kidnapped by villains, they'll probably take it easier on him. That and the fact he's a child. Katsuki's eyes never wavered from the boy, and he put 2 hands upon the glass, creating a semi-loud thump which made Izuku look upwards. He saw Katsuki's hands against the glass. He looked down at his left hand, then hesitantly stepped forward and pressed his hand against the glass, over Katsuki's. Katsuki felt his heart lurch, and he smiled. He knew his Deku was in there somewhere, and he wasn't going to give up on him. Since when did Bakugo Katsuki back down from a challenge? Izuku, if you hurt this man, you won't be allowed to see your mother and friend. Izuku narrowed his eyes, contemplating his next move. Then he slowly got out of the stance, realizing that they were here, and the flames slowly dissipated and his red eyes turned to his green ones. Wait, if they were here, then... He turned his head to the window, and saw the familiar blonde hair and red eyes and his mother's green hair and green eyes. With tears in his eyes he rushed forwards, and put his hand over his mom's, who was pressing it against the cold glass, and his other hand occupied the space beside his mom's. Suddenly a name appeared with the blonde's face, and years-old memories resurfaced and flashed in front of his eyes, as if it were a movie of his past life. Mom? Kaken? His voice was strangled and broken. After 9 years, he finally sees the people who've loved him and stood by him. They were here in front of him. With tear-filled eyes, he watched as the blonde's mouth fell into a beautiful smile, and the blonde seemed to chuckle. Who else would it be, you idiot? It's me, baby. It's Mama. These sentences made him release a river of tears. His shoulders shaking. Everything he's ever done in his fed up, piece of shit life, all of it, has led to this. The moment in which he's reunited with his family. They're safe and he's safe. He just isn't stable enough for anyone to be around him yet. The sentence made him back away and look downwards. His hands dropped to his side. That's right, he's a problem right now. He's a danger, a threat. Just as always. When will it ever change? Will he ever change? Is he even good enough to be in this room, or even the Bay Plump? A thud made the boy look upwards. His eyes flickered to the hand, and back to Kaken's eyes. He inhaled sharply and looked down at his scarred left hand, then back to the hand. He stepped forward slowly, then hesitantly pressed his hand against the glass, over Kaken's. Of course, Kaken's hands were larger, but there was a spark, and he looked upwards, emeralds clashing against rubies. He felt the small promise somewhere in his heart that this blonde wouldn't give up. The beautiful smile grazed his features, and Izuku couldn't help but to let out a small shy one in return, and he hoped it looked normal and not threatening. His green eyes filled with tears again, and he felt a single tear slid down his cheek. Kaken wouldn't give up on him, but Izuku couldn't help but to doubt the blonde. He has monsters, terrifying demons that chase him. They're relentless, evil things. Could he really chase them away? Izuku's smile faltered before returning twice as bright. For some reason the blonde and his mother made him calm. They calmed his wild and darkened thoughts. They calmed his broken mind, and brought some glimmer of hope in him. He closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against the cool glass. Yes, he could do it. He could beat these monsters and demons that plague his mind. Hello. I am running this Scott, and you're probably hating me right now, but this is something of the utmost importance. Also teaser for E3. So as you all know, I am currently helping my family out after Hurricane Fuckmess. Hurricane Florence destroyed the neighborhood and I'm helping with cleanup and other people's mess and yeah. Anyway, I have a small surprise planned for you guys, but I need you guys to vote on this, so PSC read the options carefully. After this book is finished, which won't be soon, I'm thinking at least 15 chapters, but I want to start another project. However, I have 4 in mind and I can only do one at a time, so here's the options. Voltron Spyo, Ship, Haikyuu Werewolf and Hunter AU. Ship, Kagehina. BNJ Coffee Cafe Restaurant. Ship, Todobaku Deku Todo Dekubaku. Haikyuu Coffee Cafe Restaurant. Ship, Asahi Noya and Uwai and Kagehina and Daisuga. So yeah, enjoy I guess? Oh, and a teaser for episode 3. Enjoy! The harsh scratch of pen on paper is what filled Bakugo Katsuki's senses. The occasional sigh filled the room, as expected. Today Class 1A had a written test in mathematics, and Katsuki and the others in the top 10 were already finished. The others, however, were struggling to stay within the time limit. So Katsuki was allowing himself to plunge into the memories that has arisen from the dead in the past week. It seemed like only yesterday he was finally seeing his childhood friend, when it was nearly 8 days ago. However, since then, Katsuki was slowly letting himself fall into the pit of memories he hid from himself and the world. It was a stress reliever, and every time he remembered something amazing, he would tell Izuku after school, and sit for an hour hearing what the little hero nerd had remembered or just catching up each other with what's happened in their lives. Katsuki looked out the window, letting a calming memory take over him, and he let out a small smirk. He had fallen into the creek and hit his head and Izuku came running down after him. However, instead of accepting his help, he rejected it. His face fell into the normal set-off expression, and he couldn't help but to be mad at himself. The week after that is when Izuku got kidnapped, and Katsuki didn't do a DMN thing about it. A small explosion released itself from the brooding male, making everyone's eyes lock onto him. He looked around, noticing the scratching of the pencil stopped, and saw all eyes on him. He released a shaky, but terrifying growl, making everyone but a few go back to their tests. He released another growl, more confident, and the others went back to their work as well. It hadn't been more than a few seconds when the bell rang, dismissing them to lunch. Katsuki had stood up and grabbed his bag, carelessly swinging it over his shoulder, and went to walk out when the entire Class 1A stood in his way. What do you FING extras want? Arc 1. Episode 3, Recovery and Painful Scars. Inspired by XXXXX. The harsh scratch of pen on paper is what filled Bakugo Katsuki's senses. The occasional sigh filled the room, as expected. Today Class 1A had a written test in mathematics, and Katsuki and the others in the top 10 were already finished. The others, however, were struggling to stay within the time limit. So Katsuki was allowing himself to plunge into the memories that has arisen from the dead in the past week. It seemed like only yesterday he was finally seeing his childhood friend, when it was nearly 8 days ago. However, since then, Katsuki was slowly letting himself fall into the pit of memories he hid from himself and the world. It was a stress reliever, and every time he remembered something amazing, he would tell Izuku after school, and sit for an hour hearing what the little hero nerd had remembered or just catching up each other with what's happened in their lives. Katsuki looked out the window, letting a calming memory take over him, and he let out a small smirk. He had fallen into the creek and hit his head and Izuku came running down after him. However, instead of accepting his help, he rejected it. His face fell into the normal set-off expression, and he couldn't help but to be mad at himself. The week after that is when Izuku got kidnapped, and Katsuki didn't do a DMN thing about it. A small explosion released itself from the brooding male, making everyone's eyes lock onto him. He looked around, noticing the scratching of the pencil stopped, and saw all eyes on him. He released a shaky, but terrifying growl, making everyone but a few go back to their tests. He released another growl, more confident, and the others went back to their work as well. It hadn't been more than a few seconds when the bell rang, dismissing them to lunch. Katsuki had stood up and grabbed his bag, carelessly swinging it over his shoulder, and went to walk out when the entire Class 1A stood in his way. What do you FING extras want? Katsuki growled. You've been acting weird, Bakugo. Not your normal explosive self. You seem to be happy. Katsuki let out a loud scoff. What? Is it all of a fucking sudden criminal for me to be effing happy, round face? The brunette before him shook her head, and Kirishima stepped forward with that half-and-half BS. What's going on? Kirishima asked, and Bakugo sighed and sat down at a random desk and motioned for the people to sit before him. They all did with curious looks, and listened closely as Katsuki took a calming breath before spilling the beans. A long FANG time ago I had this friend of mine. His parents were getting divorced and all that shit. Well, we were playing at the DMN park when he took Izuku. That fucker with that gate quirk was there too, and I didn't do anything to even just stop him. The room was silent, until Shinso raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry, but why are you happy that he is gone and with villains? Katsuki growled and released an explosion before looking down. Because they found him. I get to FNG see him every day after shitty school, so I have a second chance or whatever the F you call it. I'll be dead if I waste it or F up. Their eyes widened in surprise and Katsuki rolled his eyes. Is he joining us at UA? No. The answer came before Katsuki opened his mouth. Everyone looked at the door to see Aizawa with his signature yellow sleeping bag. He's too emotionally unstable. Although I would love to have him, right now he's a risk to the other students. The students looked upset, even Shinso and Todoroki for some reason. I can take you guys to see him IFING guess. We'd have to do it behind the shitty glass. Katsuki wasn't a nice person, so he had no clue on why he just told his class they could visit his old friend that also happens to be the former assassin that killed people and worked for the League of Villains. However, he held true to his promise. Today's therapy was different to say the least. After all, Izuku didn't expect to get such kindness or pet a puppy for that matter. However, that therapist man, whose name he learned to be Takahashi, walked in with a dog and several puppies. Sorry I'm late. Princess decided to have her puppies a week ago and I decided that maybe you should met them. Izuku at first disagreed, afraid he'd burn or scar the pups. You've made tremendous progress, Midoriya. I highly doubt you have the will or mindset to hurt something this innocent. It had taken many tries, but finally, Izuku picked up the blonde and white chihuahua. It was a female and she was sweet and cuddly. Her eyes were a gorgeous shade of brown, with hints of amber in them. Izuku felt his heart melt and he touched noses with her, careful to not hurt her or force her away. He softly and hesitantly kissed the nose, and put her back near the mom who nudged he towards her to eat. He looked up at the therapist and raised an eyebrow. We call that one Aphrodite. She's taken a liking to you. Usually she squeals when picked up. Izuku looked towards the window, not really wanting to speak. Izuku, did they make fun of you? For what gender you like? Izuku's eyes widened as he looked at the brown-haired man. What? His voice was faint, but there. The man frowned. You aren't straight, are you? Izuku looked away. They hurt me because I'm pansexual. I know it's stupid and I shouldn't think of boys as a choice, but Izuku, it isn't anything to be ashamed for. The reply was shocked and soft, as if he'd been through this conversation with himself multiple times. Listen, the green eyes clashed with a blue. I felt the same way, I'm bisexual, so believe me, I felt awful and didn't want it to be true. In the end, I still had to face it and understood that it's a part of me. Izuku looked out the window, his left hand supporting his head as he gazed outside. Thinking of your friend? Izuku shrugged. Midoriya, are you okay? Izuku's eyes flicked over to the man, before turning back to the window. I've come to terms with my sexuality, Takahashi. I don't want to be pansexual because never mind. It's stupid. Izuku laid his head upon his now folded arms and his eyes now followed little Aphrodite around the table. I'm here for you to talk, Izuku. It's not stupid. Izuku's eyes flashed a red before returning to normal. He allowed himself to brace himself for a wave of nausea and depression, common when he talked about them. It happened a year ago. Izuku-in, a bright bubbly female said as she ran up to the curly green-haired male. She was around 156 centimeters, being extremely shorter than Izuku and having to look up to him. Ikiara-chan, does Aiko-kun know you're here? Izuku stood from his bar stool. Today, Master was grateful enough to keep him inside. He said he didn't need his pet getting hypothermia or frostbite. He needed Izuku healthy for the next few jobs he was going to do. The blonde-headed female with lilac-purple eyes smiled. Suddenly Izuku felt arms around his waist and lips on his cheek. A small smile managed to slip onto Izuku's face and he leaned back into the embrace. What are you doing here, Aiko? Izuku said as he looked to his left, seeing Aiko's messy brown hair with specks of red and his amber eyes. His face held small freckles that made Izuku's look like a starry night in a city compared to Aiko's whose cheeks looked like a galaxy. It was sadly only across his nose and a few scattered around his cheeks. Tasilo. Why else? Izuku's face heated up and he looked down. Well, I just thought you probably stopped by to get a drink or talk to a client. He was cut off by rough calloused hands grabbing his jaw and turning it toward Aiko. Aizu, my love, I don't need a reason to come and see you. I long for the day Shigaraki and your father give you to our father. That will be the day of triumph and happiness, yeah? Izuku smiled a bit, before closing his eyes and being kissed by Aiko. Can you two knock it off? I'm still here, you know. Akiara's voice rang through their ears and they parted to look at her. She rolled her eyes. If you're gonna do a porno, make sure it's around people who want to watch. Akiara. Izuku's eyes were widened in dismay as Aiko's grip tightened. I would never let other watch our personal affairs. Where did you even learn that language? A growl came from behind the trio, and they turned to see a seething Shigaraki. And Master! He narrowed his eyes and grabbed Izuku from Aiko, harshly pulling the two away. He held him up by his shirt. So what are you? Z? A slot? Put him down. Shigaraki looked over at the two young villains. What are you going to do, you quirkless brats? You may be Yakuza heirs, but you aren't sheet here. Aiko brought out a knife and threw it at Shigaraki. A purple mass devoured it and it opened in front of Aiko. It grazed his cheek, causing it to cut him. Aiko, please. Just stop while you can. Aiko shifted his eyes to Shigaraki to Izuku, then back to the blue-haired demon. Put him down. Shigaraki lifted him a bit higher, and Aiko charged. Suddenly, 5 fingers were over his chest, and blood-curdling screams were emitted from the boy. No. Stop. Master, you're killing him. In a few moments, there was nothing left, and Akiara charged forward to avenge her brother Enoi to be met with the same fate. Shigaraki dropped the boy, and he scooted over, where only a pool of blood remained. Something caught his eye, and he reached out picking up a bit of leftover silver-colored cloth before it too vanished into the wind. That's why you don't love. It's a stupid weakness. Can't believe Hisashi hasn't taught you that. Katsuki led the group to the station. The only ones interested in coming today was half and half, shitty hair, shitty glasses, round face, Pikachu reject, the pink alien and the purple-haired emo. He hoped it wasn't a huge change, or would make all the progress that the man had made with his friend all for nothing. In short, he was desperately hoping he wasn't severely FING up by bringing them here. He walked past the detective, who narrowed his eyes at the boy and his group before walking over and stopping the ash blonde. What are they doing here? Katsuki looked over his shoulder before turning to the detective and growled. They're here because I can bring them here. You never fucking said anything about not bringing in others. The detective looked towards the steel door with a small window. He sighed. The therapist has been in and out of there all day. Right now, from what I've heard, he's not in the best condition. Katsuki narrowed his eyes. Something seemed off about the detective. Really off. He rolled his eyes. Detective, I'm going to go in there whether you if and want me to or not. He walked away, the small group scurrying after him. He opened the wooden door beside the metal one and walked in. He glanced at the window. He took in a sharp breath. Izuku was at the table, sobbing his eyes out before his hands formed into fists and hit the table. A bang resonated throughout both rooms, then Izuku brought a scarred hand up and ran it through his long hair that still hasn't been cut. Wow, is he normally like this? Shitty Hair said softly to Bakugo. Bakugo hesitated and then shook his head. No. Not even when we talk about the kidnapping. He casted a glance to the therapist who shot him a sharp look, before narrowing his eyes slightly and then returning them to normal. It was the look he's given Katsuki only once before, and it meant he wasn't in the condition to be talked to right now. Katsuki shoved everyone out the room before softly closing the door. The therapist basically told me not right now. Besides, I'm iffy hungry. The others slightly smiled. Come on. Let's go to the cafeteria. Izuku let out a shaky sigh. I didn't do anything to save them. To save him. Izuku laid his head in his hands. A sudden wave of uncontrollable guilt and anger surged throughout his entire being. I didn't save him. The sentence was a whimper of utter failure. He trusted me and he shut his eyes tightly, trying to wipe the memory from his mind. You feel like you failed him. I understand. You can't let it get the best of you. They would want you to be happy, Midoriya. Izuku nodded slowly, letting the words soak in. He was right. Aiko and Akiara always wanted him to be happy, so why wouldn't they want him to be happy now? A fond smile found its way onto Izuku's face, and he sighed happily. Finally he can lay them to rest. In a large warehouse on the outskirts of Mizudafu, Japan, a young blue-haired man sat at the bar. A small glass of whiskey and something else he could not remember was in his right hand, as his left held up his head. Two people sat beside him. One had a mess of black spikes as his hair and metal staples that held his normal olive skin together with scarred purple burns. His attire was burned, ripped and overall hoboish. However, his quirk was strong and his eyes a teal that could slice through even the toughest of steel, the toughest of men. The other was a high school girl. Her blonde hair was done up into two buns on top of her head and her eyes were an unsettling amber that swirled with insanity in the very depths. It wasn't hard for Tamura to get angry at the two. After all, he didn't really like anyone. Hisashi. His voice was still boyish and not very deep, but it held a venomous and insane tone. He wasn't in the best mood. The man that he had summoned had black curly hair that was pulled into a small ponytail in the back. His eyes were an unsettling amber, and he had on his usual all-black villain outfit. Yes, Shigaraki? The blue-haired male growled, and the man walked closer. Kurogiri, where in the hell is Midoriya? The response was silence, and just before Shigaraki opened his mouth to yell at the man, he was given his response. He's captured Tamura. The response was a dry, humorless laugh. Let's give him a visit then? So, what's your relationship with the dude? Shitty Hair asked Bakugo as they sat down at the table with their food. The wait took forever because they had to cook the food, which took about 40 minutes. Bakugo took in a deep breath. He's my FNG friend. He was my best friend when we were younger. His name is Midoriya Izuku. He used to be nice and friendly and now he's a FI&A, so beware. The table let out a small laugh, and Katsuki even managed to let a small smile slip. How'd it happen? Katsuki's eyes snapped to the purple-haired emo. He looked at his food before sitting up straight and looking out the nearby window, then back to the boy. His dad tricked us. Well, he almost tricked us. When he was taking Izuku, I noticed, and he let out a shit ton of if-ain't cuss words at me. He had never cursed at us before and we immediately knew that he wasn't who he effing seemed. It happened so effing fast and before we knew it, he was halfway in the portal thing when the nearest hero arrived. The table went silent. It's okay. I'm sure he... Code Red. I repeat, this is a code red. All units report to room 289 in Hall B. I repeat, 289 in Hall B. Bakugo shot out of his seat and ran to the door. Bakugo! The blonde turned to the small group who were barely out of their seats. That's Izuku's room. He shouted back and they were suddenly beside him as they ran through the halls. The police were shoved harshly out of the way as his eyes widened. Izuku was protecting two men behind him. One Katsuki recognized as the therapist, the other he recognized as the detective. His eyes were a bright scarlet while his throat glowed a disturbing orangish color. Fire surrounded his hands and cut the two men off from everyone else but was far enough so it wouldn't burn them. Katsuki growled and an explosion went off in his hand. He's a FING wreck and yet he's still trying to FING play hero. FNG unbelievable. Katsuki growled under his breath as he and his classmates watched in anticipation at what will unfold before them. Shigaraki, your fight isn't with them. Let them pass. Izuku's voice was monotonous, and that's what really shocked Katsuki. Izuku always had some emotion in his voice, but this person before him wasn't the Izuku he knew. Katsuki stumbled backwards, eyes wide. Everyone had taken a step back. The bloodlust flowing from the young boy was terrifying. He could almost see it. No. You know the consequences to your actions. You knew what would happen, now you get to experience the pain tenfold. What did you do? His monotone voice broke into one of rage near the end. Your mother and friend are going to be dead by the time we're done. Courtesy of your father and myself dashed. He wasn't able to finish his sentence before Izuku ran forward and punched the man. The boy stumbled and looked upwards, a hand going to grab his wrist until Izuku slapped him with his fire, creating a burn on his cheek. The blue-haired male, Shigaraki, released a growl. Midoriya released one that was twice as terrifying before bringing his knee to the man's stomach and watched him crumble to the floor. He used his knees to pin the man's wrists down harshly before landing blow after blow after blow on his face. Suddenly, something was said that made Izuku hesitate and shift his weight. In that moment the male wrenched his left hand out from under the knee and touched the boy's thigh. A blood-curdling scream left his lips and Izuku managed to leap away from the bluette. Izuku! Katsuki screamed as he eyed the deep wound on his thigh. It was a handprint, clearly that showed muscle in some parts. Blood poured from the wound, but the green-haired boy didn't seem to notice it. His fire went to the wound, and the boy visibly bit his lips and clenched his teeth. Awe and horror went through Class 1A as they watched the boy use his own fire to cauterize the wound. Then, when he was finished, he made an underhand swiping motion, the fire rushing forwards at an alarming rate before a purple mist opened and then disappeared. The fire hitting the wall, no Shigaraki in sight. Izuku huffed, then looked backwards. Are you guys okay? Izuku asked in between small pants. The two men rushed forwards when Izuku swayed. Katsuki hit the glass and pointed to his thigh, only for the detective to check and looked upwards. Someone call an ambulance. It had been an hour before Katsuki was informed that he could see Inko, but couldn't see Izuku due to him resting. So of course Katsuki did what people told him he couldn't. He snuck into Izuku's room. The boy was looking up at the ceiling in utter despair and boredom when Katsuki walked in. He had jumped before seeing Katsuki and his eyes widened. Kaken, I don't think you should be here dash. Who the F said I couldn't? Besides, you looked bored as any hell in here. They shared a silence as Katsuki walked towards the bed and sat down on a chair beside him. They both looked out the nearby window, before Izuku sighed and Katsuki looked to the boy. Is mom okay? Katsuki nodded, then looked him in the eyes. Your dad busted her up real bad, but she only has a broken arm and a few FING bruises and small but cuts. Nothing too FING major, unlike you. Izuku let out a humorless chuckle. Shigaraki has the decay quirk. Hurts like a beach. They shared a dry laugh before an awkward silence filled itself between them. Don't you ever scare me like that again, Deku? Izuku's eyes lightened up slightly and he let out a small laugh. Can't promise that. Katsuki glared at the boy, only to have him let out another small laugh. The squeaking sound of a cart made them both freeze. Mr. Midoriya? Can I come in? Izuku's eyes darted to Katsuki, who wasn't there. His eyes darted to the window, which held a Katsuki who was only halfway out. Midoriya? I'm here! He yelled as Katsuki held onto the glass before smirking and jumping down. Izuku rolled his eyes in annoyance. Only Katsuki would do something so reckless. You can come in. To Episode 4, Trial by Fire, Part 1. Inspired by XXXXX. It was nearly a week later, when Izuku Midoriya was released from the hospital. The coming of fall was signified by the light frost and cool touches the air left upon his skin. He breathed out a white cloud, a small smile finding its way upon his face. Izuku's favorite season was autumn, and he could tell you why. It was the season of change. Izuku thought happily. Maybe that is what will await him? Midoriya. The gruff voice made his head turn to the pro-hero Eraserhead, who, true to his word, met Izuku outside of the hospital. Eraser, he said with a small smirk. Come with me. We have some things to discuss. Izuku perked up an eyebrow, but he tagged along. After all, nothing bad would happen, right? Izuku forced himself to run, catching up with Aizawa's unusually long strides, and fell in line as they walked in the sleeping city on the sidewalk. They walked for a few moments before Izuku let out a sigh. It's about my trial, isn't it? It was more of a statement than a mere question, and if Aizawa was surprised by him guessing, then, well, he didn't show it. Why in the hell didn't you tell us you killed the United States Colorado senator? Aizawa turned sharp on his heel and stood in front of the young boy. A menacing stare accompanied by his sharp tone made Izuku look up at him, his face full of anger and guilt. It was a effing job. I don't remember half of my FING kills. If I did, I sure as hell be dead or missing right now and definitely wouldn't be here right now. Small tears pricked the edge of the boy's eyes, but before Aizawa could apologize or calm him down, the boy stepped backwards. His hands clenched in tight fists. I did what I had to survive. I did what I had to see my family again. There was a small silence between the two. Silence was deafening, but this silence held a deeper understanding, and Aizawa's secluded self could feel like he was starting to understand him just a little bit more. Midoriya, Izuku looked upwards, tears spilling out of his eyes softly. I will make sure you aren't guilty. That was the first time Midoriya Izuku felt he could be free. Hello, Mr. Midoriya, I will be your lawyer. Do you know that your case will be a bit different than you are expecting? A tall blonde-haired man with his hair slicked back walked to Izuku's table. He was clearly an American due to his accent in his Japanese. Other than that, you could have passed him off as Japanese. Izuku raised an eyebrow. How so? Since you killed someone that was high in the government, you're having a trial held here but by an American-ruled court. So instead of being tried like you are in Japan, you'll be tried like you are in America. The sentence brought Izuku to his knees. Figuratively speaking, but he internally wailed. What? Izuku muttered, eyes wide. That's impossible, right? Well, you broke several laws and you are what both nations are fighting over. This was the only way to do it, or it would result in a war. Izuku leaned back into his seat, shocked and in disbelief. Of course Shigaraki would send him to kill someone so high in another country's government. It would just make it that much harder to escape his clutches. My name is Thomas. He held out a hand for Izuku to shake, and Izuku reached forwards and grabbed his hand. The man shook his hand, and then Izuku sat back down in his seat, as did the lawyer. So, can you tell me exactly what happened? A month passed. Katsuki was turned away at the door of the station, but he hoped today something would be different. He took a deep breath, preparing to get hit upside the head this time, but was greeted by Aizawa-sensei's presence. You can go see him. Bakuga's eyes lightened up and he ran towards the room and opened the steel door. He saw Izuku's face and he rushed forwards, stopping just in front of him. The green-haired boy didn't respond with his small smile, and Bakuga's disappeared, leaving behind a raised eyebrow instead. What's wrong, Deku? Izuku looked at the boy before dragging him to the far corner where two beanbag chairs sat. Izuku took one chair and Bakuga took the other. Speak. Bakuga growled in irritation. There was the silence, then a sigh. I wanted to tell you something. Izuku's eyes glanced upwards and caught the ruby reds of his friends. What is it? Bakuga asked, sitting up straighter. Izuku looked downwards, then sighed. Kaken, if something doesn't go right with this trial. What do you mean if something doesn't go right? Katsuki's eyes were narrowed in a mixture of confusion and anger. I mean if I'm guilty. Katsuki's eyes widened. He hadn't thought of that, nor had he thought of the trial. His body became oddly numb. No, he already had lost his friend once and now he might lose him again? What kind of sick joke was fate pulling? Katsuki's body grew goosebumps and he met soft, warm, forest green eyes. I want you to know that you and my mom are what got me through it. All the pain, Izuku looked downwards, a small smile on his face, was to see you two again. Izuku looked upwards through his shaggy hair and Katsuki felt tears prick at his eyes. Instead of crying, he opened his arms, leaving a confused Izuku. "Once chance hug you loser," he said softly. Izuku's heart swelled at the feeling of being loved, and he lurched forwards and hugged him. The hug was tight, and neither party wanted to let go in fear that they would be pulled apart by the evil and cruel hands of fate. Yet fate had other plans. "Izuku Midoriya, I sentence you not guilty of several accounts of first-degree murder, not guilty of manslaughter in the first degree, and guilty of conspiracy against several governments. However, since it is known that you shared all the information that you had obtained through your work as a villain, and since this isn't a regular case, instead of jail time, you will be living underneath a pro-hero. And go to UA. I hear they're starting a reforming class for villains wishing to become heroes. Make us proud and don't end up here again. Case dismissed." Izuku turned around and was hugged instantly by his mother, then he was passed to Katsuki, who he instantly hugged. Happy tears flooded out of his eyes, and he could hear Bakugo scoff lightly. "Now you've done it. You've wet my diamond shirt, Deku." Izuku pulled away and let out a happy laugh as he wiped his eyes and let out a small sniffle. "I'm sorry, Kaken." They both had wide smiles. This meant everything was going to be okay. The harsh sound of TV static filled the small room. A man hooked up to life support smiled an evil grin and turned to the blue-haired male. "Master, we failed." The man grinning let out a scoff. "No, Tamir, you failed. This time, I will not hesitate from killing you if you fail me. Bring Midoriya Izuku here, alive." Shigaraki looked at the man bewildered. "Why, master?" "Because I'm going to remove that quirk from his body once and for all. Let's see how his precious Bakugo and friends like him then." "Hey, what's up guys? Running_wild 829 here, and I am bringing you the results of our amazing poll. If you don't remember the options, here they are. 1. Voltron, Spy AU. 2. Haikyuu, Werewolf Hunter AU. 3. Bean Cafe Coffee Restaurant AU. 4. Haikyuu, Cafe Coffee Restaurant AU. The reason I posted this poll was due to the fact I loved all 4 ideas, so I was definitely going to do all of them. However, this was for the order I was going to do them in. So without further ado, hold your breath no longer because here's the results. 1. Bean Cafe Coffee Restaurant AU. 2. Voltron, Spy AU. 3. Haikyuu, Werewolf Hunter AU. 4. Haikyuu, Cafe Restaurant Coffee AU. And now, another teaser for another episode. Episode 5, Trial by Fire, Part 2. It was the one time in Izuku's life that he had felt pure, unrelenting fear coursing through his veins and keeping him frozen in place. It wasn't like when the hero killer paralyzed him, or when Shigaraki got mad at him, or when his father cornered him when he only had a towel between them. No. This kind of fear came from the explosions outside. This kind of fear came when Kaken stood beside him and the entire class watched helpless as villains stormed the school, only for an oh-so-familiar brunette to walk in behind them. The same messy brown bedhead that should have disappeared long ago. The brown-haired boy that died from Shigaraki years ago. The brunette that Izuku fell hopelessly in love with. Aiko-kun. Enjoy the teaser. Episode 5 should be out sometime between today and tomorrow. Thanks for the love and criticism. Remember, take names and kick at us. Episode 5, Trial by Fire, Part 2. Inspired by XXXX. It was the one time in Izuku's life that he had felt pure, unrelenting fear coursing through his veins and keeping him frozen in place. It wasn't like when the hero killer paralyzed him, or when Shigaraki got mad at him, or when his father cornered him when he only had a towel between them. No. This kind of fear came from the explosions outside. This kind of fear came when Kaken stood beside him and the entire class watched helpless as villains stormed the school, only for an oh-so-familiar brunette to walk in behind them. The same messy brown bedhead that should have disappeared long ago. The brown-haired boy that died from Shigaraki years ago. The brunette that Izuku fell hopelessly in love with. Aiko-kun. 9 months earlier. Terror flooded through Izuku's very being as he stood outside Class 1A. He looked at Katsuki with a questioning look. So my rehabilitation class just so happens to be the top hero course class and your class, Kaken? Izuku looked at Katsuki out of the corner of his eye only to see the blonde scowling at him. Izuku couldn't help the small giggles that slipped past his lips. They can be a fucking handful sometimes, so watch your DMN step. Katsuki said with a small smirk. Izuku looked over, a small nervous smile upon his face, and looked back to the door. I'm not afraid of them, I'm afraid of what they'll think of a former villain being a classmate. Izuku turned his head when he heard a scoff, and saw Katsuki's eyes narrowed. They'll be their normal happy but selves, Deku. Don't if you worry about that. Izuku looked to Katsuki before managing a small smile and turning back to the door. You first, Kaken. A harsh push was all that the door needed to open. Of course, this was nothing new to Katsuki. Although Kaminari, Ida, Todoroki, Kirishima, Ochako, Shinso and Ishido had seen Izuku, the others hadn't. He already knew how they were going to react, so it didn't bother him. Deku, however, was an entirely different story. Katsuki felt victorious when Izuku spoke his fears, yet at the same time it allowed Katsuki to open a few fears of his own. What if they reacted badly to his scars? Katsuki remembered the awe and anger for whoever hurt the former ball of sunshine, however, he could see how some were disgusted at them. Pushing those thoughts out of his head, he grabbed Izuku's wrist and pulled him into the class. The small boy letting out a smoky huff of laughter before realizing there were people in the class. Katsuki could feel the boy's pulse quicken, and he turned, squeezing Izuku's wrist in a silent gesture to bring him back to earth. DMN Deku, at least introduce yourself. Katsuki teased while rolling his eyes. A sharp intake of air was heard by the blonde followed by stuttering. Oh, why, I'm right. My name's Midoriya Izuku, but you probably know me better as former assassin of the League of Villains. Katsuki watched as Ishido's jaw dropped followed by several others. Wait, you were the dreaded assassin? Why aren't you in prison? Minetta's voice rang out and Katsuki tensed with Izuku. He stepped forward to give the perverted wannabe a lesson, when he felt Izuku's wrist turn and two fingers softly caress his thumb. It was subtle and unnoticed by everyone except Izuku and Katsuki. He felt himself back off, but he didn't hesitate to send a sharp glare and growl to the boy. Well, it's because I was forced to. They tortured me and, they threatened Katsuki and my mom. If everyone's jaws weren't on the floor, they were by now. How did you escape? The question came from Tsuyu, which she released a small ribbit afterwards. Izuku looked upwards and let out a small smile. I didn't actually. I was sent on a mission to kill the hero killer Stain and two of your classmates actually caught me. Then I was put into an interrogation room where I lived for a couple months. Your scars are pretty. Izuku's eyes widened as his head snapped to Ochako. What? Her face heated up and she looked downwards. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. Why? Izuku's voice was soft, just barely audible. But why are my scars pretty? Katsuki would have agreed with round face if he wasn't in front of these extras. Oh, well, they kinda paint a picture of your past. Each one shows a different story, a different time you had the strength to live. Izuku's face exploded into red, and he looked to the floor. To be honest, the only reason that I stayed alive is because I wanted to see Katsuki and my mom again. Katsuki had already heard this and he took his thumb and subtly rubbed it against the two fingers to calm his once more frantic pulse. He could see the tension in his shoulders leave out of the corner of his eyes, and was extremely happy he had a calming effect on the male too. Alright, sit down. It's time for class to begin. Aizawa said, startling the two boys, so Katsuki released him and both jumped away from each other as if they were caught in a forbidden act. Katsuki was the first to snap out of it and he dragged Izuku to the desk behind him and sat down in his own. Izuku sat down silently, and thus the day began. Screeching was heard down the hall to the right, behind a steel door with a small window. In this room was 3 people. One being a brunette with striking amber eyes that flashed red or a black and purple. The other was a blue-haired male covered in hands, whose eyes were as red as a cherry. The last person was wispy, like the cosmos. His eyes were a golden yellow, which had unsettled the youngest for his entire life. The youngest was the brunette, and the brunette was the only one chained to a table, arms and legs spread out in an X formation. Cuts littered his thighs, some were old and scarred over. Others were more recent and scabbing over, and then you had the newly inflicted cuts. The ones that bled and had certain tools sticking out of them. One had a pair of tweezers, and another held a screw or nail. The brunette couldn't exactly tell due to the black spots in his vision that threatened to turn his entire world to the black abyss he wished he could stay in. His body was almost entirely numb. Every nerve in his body had been damaged one way or another, and the only thing that he could feel was extreme heat or the extreme cold. Pain flooded his senses once more and the male screamed into the GG. Then when the burning hot thing pulled away, his GG was removed and the male began to hyperventilate. The pain in his chest made it unbearable to breathe, and that only added to the oncoming panic attack and the rapid breaths. Aiko, are you going to be compliant now? The blue-haired BSRD spoke and Aiko dropped his head in SBMSN. So this is what his love, Izuku, had felt for so many years. Yes, master. The words were separate, and his voice was completely raw due to the constant screaming. When he looked upwards, Kurogyari and Shigaraki saw the broken, dull, mixed purple, red and amber eyes. Shigaraki let out a happy scoff. That's right, pet. Izuku curled up on the couch in between Katsuki and Shinso. Kirishima and Todoroki at his feet, and the rest of Class 1A gathered around the green-haired boy. Small sniffles and silent sobs came from the freckled-faced boy. Shinso had found him, and sat down, letting the boy cry on his shoulder as he awkwardly hugged the small figure. He had texted Kaminari, who grabbed some ice cream and a literal sheet-ton of pillows and blankets. Then he texted Kirishima to tell Bakugo, who in turn told the entire class and Bakugo. Shinso had rolled his eyes, and the entire class didn't say anything and just sat around the boy, giving comfort by their presence. The boy had his knees to his chest, and his legs were leaning against Shinso while his head was on Katsuki's shoulder, as he scooped the ice cream into his mouth. Then, the boy put the ice cream down on the table and firmly curled into Katsuki's side. Shinso eyed Katsuki, who just leaned back into the green, curly-haired boy and wrapped an arm around him to pull him closer. This wasn't the same Bakugo that the rest of Class 1A knew. Their Bakugo would have pushed the boy off without a second thought, and probably would have killed him. Yet, this Bakugo seemed to be an actual human and tried to comfort the boy. Suddenly, a loud sob pulled everyone's attention to the green-haired male, only to see him clutching Katsuki's shirt and eyes wide open and glazed, as if he were somewhere else, in a very deep part of his mind. A panicked look was passed through everyone, but it truly kicked in when the small boy let out a terrifying guttural scream. "What's going on?" Kaminari said as he stood up, eyes wide. Katsuki grabbed the boy and put him in a bridal-style position, one Shinso was definitely going to comment on after this, and looked all over the boy, looking for any type of physical contact that would make the boy quieter or stop. None of which helped, but instead made the boy squirm in his grip. Shinso swore he saw the blonde's heart break, and tears prick at his eyes. "I don't know," he said, and Shinso totally didn't miss Bakugo's thumb caress Izuku's ring and middle finger on his right hand. "Shinso, can you make him stop?" Shinso grabbed Kaminari. "I have an idea. Kaminari, can you get a pen and notebook?" The blonde looked puzzled but nodded at the purple-haired boy's request. He returned seconds later with an old beat-up notebook and a pen. Shinso took them gently from the blonde's hands, and sat them down on the table and Shinso turned to Izuku. He had to make him say something, anything. "Grab him roughly," he told Katsuki. "What? No." Shinso growled and leaned forwards, and roughly grabbed him. "Aiko!" Instantly the room was silent, and Izuku's grip went slack on Katsuki's shirt. "Write down what Aiko means to you and what you were screaming about on that piece of paper." There was silence, then the boy got up clumsily and stumbled over, and then dropped to his knees. He furiously scribbled things, and then when he put the pen down, Shinso released his hold, making the boy slump backwards, exhausted. "Kaken!" His voice was weak and raw, and the ash blonde slowly climbed down from the couch and held the male in his arms. The younger just slumped against his chest, and no one dared to question it. What did you make me write? There was a silence before Shinso sat down in front of Izuku, the broccoli-haired boy watching him in the corner of his vision. Who Aiko is and what you were screaming about. Can we read? The boy muttered something and Katsuki leaned over and grabbed the notebook to hand it to Kirishima. He said for you to read it aloud. Kirishima looked down at the pad, then sat down on the couch. Aiko equals love, acceptance, hope. Lover. Kirishima's eyes snapped to the weak boy who gave a small, barely noticeable nod. Aiko's death by Shigaraki. Silver cloth, purple, red and amber eyes. Kirishima turned to the boy for an explanation, but he was already asleep, dozing in the ash blonde's arms. So, Aiko was Midoriya's lover, who gave him love, acceptance and hope. They were also killed by this Shigaraki dude. He probably wears silver clothing, and had a mixture of purple, red and amber eyes. Jiru said confused. Who would have a mix of purple, red and amber eyes? They would have definitely been all over the news. You aren't just born with eyes like that. Yaoyorozu said slowly looking at Todoroki. You haven't heard of any other hero kids with those eyes? Todoroki shook his head. Guys. Kaminari took his phone and casted a picture to the TV, showing a pair of siblings with two whiteboards in front of their chests. Both reading Nakamura. One was a tall male, ranging around 180 centimeters, and he had brown messy bed hair that seemed to have a red tint. He had freckles across his nose and faintly dusted on his high cheekbones. He was very muscular, and obviously built for pure strength. He made Kirishima and Bakugo look like wimps. He had a very distinct tattoo on the side of his neck that read "Noi" below a trident and a wolf's paw. It was the symbol for Nakamura Eto's Yakuza. One of the most ruthless one that held strong influence in Hosu. His eyes, however, were stunning. One eye was a stunning amber, while the other was a mixture of amber, purple and red. The amber was surrounding the pupil, and on the right was a crimson red and on the left was a royal purple. The female beside him was small, and around the 156 centimeter mark, and she had the same tattoo but on her right forearm. Her blonde hair was drawn into a ponytail, and her lilac-purple eyes held a killer intent but her smile screamed innocent. Who are they? Mineta asked, raising an eyebrow. Aiko and Ikera Nakamura. My former best friends and my former boyfriend. Everyone looked to the yawning green-haired boy curled into Katsuki. Get off, Deku. That's too much effing huggy-feely today. You're warm, Kaken? The boy muttered, making the elder grumble with a certain fondness in his voice that Shinso knew wasn't just a friendly gesture. A small smirk crossed his features before turning into a sour and horrified expression. Wait, you wrote Aiko died by a Shigaraki dude. The green-haired boy tensed but finally let out a sigh, and he turned himself so he was sitting in Katsuki's lap and leaning backwards for support. Aiko and Ikera were my best friends. They hated Shigaraki almost as much as I did. However, they were quirkless. They were born by two different mothers, but they only developed quirks for a short period of time before not being able to conjure them for any longer afterwards. Doctors couldn't explain it, but they both had teleportation. A form of their father's quirk. Aiko could disappear and leave something, and Ikera had to be in contact with fire to disappear. They visited me and Shigaraki found out I was dating a boy and he didn't take it too nicely. The next thing I know is that I'm screaming for Shigaraki to let go and he just doesn't and suddenly I'm lying on the ground in Aputali Fiko's blood. Izuku began to hyperventilate and Katsuki wrapped his arms around the boy. Izuku, count to 3, okay? Deep breaths, Deku. The boy's eyes shot everywhere and when they landed on Shinsu's, he saw pure panic and horror in his eyes. It hurt the purple-haired male to see the small, happy bundle of sunshine to be in such a state. The boy eventually calmed down, and his breathing returned to normal. He looked at the pictures and saw Aiko's lopsided smirk. He always put others first. Everyone looked down, the mood long turned sour. Izuku leaned into Katsuki's hug, making the ash blonde grumble about his weight. I'm sorry, Izuku said, getting up and stumbling before balancing and going around everyone. I'm sorry, he whispered more softly, And then like a flash, he was gone and the only thing the class heard was a shutting door. Katsuki looked confused and got up, only for Kirishima to hold him back. He needs time to think, man. Katsuki looked like he was going to argue, but then he looked down. Alright, if that's what he FNG needs. He muttered, then sat down on the couch. So, this guy was his lover? Kaminari said as he looked over the mail. It says he was charged with alleged murder. They couldn't find any prints or anything, so he was released. He has 2 tattoos apparently. One is the Yakuza tattoo and the other is a wolf paw and crescent moon with Deku inside the moon. Kaminari eyed Bakugo, who sat straight up and had his jaw tightly shut. What does it mean? Todoroki eyed the picture of the tattoo on the brunette's back. It's probably a calling card of some sorts. Like if I get hurt, this is my rank, who I'm from and who to contact kind of deal. Shinso pointed out. Wait, there's someone I know who can probably help us out. Kirishima said with a gleam in his eye. What are you talking about, Kirishima? Kaminari said, turning to the redhead. The male pulled out his phone and hit several buttons before placing his phone on the table. The phone emitted several long rings before a click was heard. There was several people panting and a police speaker turned on. Officer Thomas speaking. Caught the 2 criminals. West side of the Bronx, on XXXXX Street. Officer Thomas. August is down. I think he has a head injury. Ambulance needed. The voice was obviously a female and American due to the English. There were several pants before the female voice spoke into the phone in Japanese. Ijur, this better be good. It's 3 o'clock in the morning and I just chased down 2 petty thieves and I need a shower. Kirishima laughed sheepishly before speaking. Heyish. I called because we need your help with something. Kaido used to be in the Yakuza, right? There were a few more pants before a male voice was heard. Dim in it. August. Lay off the fucking Mountain Dew and donuts, heavy but motherfucker. The last 3 words went unnoticed by the Americans, but the entire class heard what the male said in Japanese. Kaito. Ijuru needs you. There was some grumbling before the female's American accented Japanese was replaced by a native's. Kirishima. Kirishima smiled and leaned down to speak into the phone. Hey Kaito. We need your help. You worked for the Yakuza before going to America, right? There was a gruff HM for an affirmative. So, we're looking into this guy by the name of Nakamura Aiko. He has 2 tattoos. One's a Yakuza tattoo, the other is a wolf paw with a crescent moon with a name in it. What is that one? There was some shuffling before the voice returned. It's a type of ICE contact. Like if I'm found dead, this is what I am and who needs to know. The wolf paw for the Nakamura means heir or leader. I'm guessing Aiko was the heir considering his old man is still kicking. The crescent moon is to tell his family, and whatever name is in there is a lover from the outside. It's found on both lovers, so whoever is written in that name probably has one too. But it will be out of sight. A place where only Aiko can see kind of deal. When the lover has the tattoo, they practically become part of the leading family. Is that all, Ijuru? There was a silence before Ijuru let out a soft sigh. When are you 3 coming to visit? You guys have been gone for too long. There was a soft chuckle. Don't worry, AG. I'll be back soon enough, probably around next month or so. Ash and August still have stuff to clean up, so they'll be there a little bit later. We basically have an entire month to ourselves. Ijuru perked up and a bright smile appeared on his face. Okay, stay safe, Kaido. I love you, brother. Eyes widened at that statement, and there was a gunshot sound on the other end of the phone. DMN car backfiring. Piece of shit. Alright, I have to go, AG, but I love you too. No funny business while I'm gone. Bye. There was a click, and Kirishima looked over, hands up in mock surrender. He's like a brother to me, so yeah. Kirishima looked to Bakugo, who was suspiciously quiet. You okay, dude? No, he growled before standing up and walking away towards Izuku's room. Baku dash. A slamming door was heard and everyone looked to each other, seeing who was going to go, but no one moved. Let's wait. Kirishima said quietly, to which everyone slowly nodded. Where in the F is your tattoo, huh? Katsuki yelled at Izuku when the door closed. Izuku looked upwards, shock and surprise written all over his face. He was in the middle of changing his shirts and released the white shirt, making drop over his form once again. "Who told you?" he said, looking around suspiciously before walking towards Katsuki. "Does it matter? Where's the effing tattoo, Deku?" Izuku growled, pushing Katsuki against the door. "Who effing told you?" Izuku screamed at the blonde. "Someone Kirishima knows told us about the DMN tattoo. I can handle you being a part of the villains because you were forced, but the Yakuza? Did you do it or did Aiko force you?" "He didn't force me to do anything," Izuku yelled. "Don't you dare say he forced me to do anything. He didn't force himself on me or force me to get the tattoo either." Izuku's eyes widened and he covered his mouth quickly. He watched as Katsuki's face morphed into one of pure rage, and explosions were heard in his hands, and Izuku ran to the other side of the room and climbed over the bed, leaving it between Katsuki and himself. "You fed him and then joined the Yakuza?" Katsuki bellowed. Izuku was pressed against the wall, tears streaming down his face. "So what? So what if I did let him F me, then I joined the Yakuza? I loved him and I joined so I could see you, and that was a way out." Izuku yelled back, taking a hesitant step forward. "Sorry if I took extra jobs, but I was trying to not get beaten every single day of my life. Excuse the F out of me for trying to stay alive." There was silence before Izuku had his fire around him, careful to not touch the walls or floor. "Get the F out now." Katsuki sneered, then turned around. "Gladly." He walked out and slammed the door, and Izuku's fire vanished and he dropped to the floor. It was the only time he wished Shigaraki would have killed him. It was the time he wished he could stand up and just off himself. Everything had been good since he joined the class 3 months ago, but now, everything had to be dragged to the surface. Now, everything would have to be explained and things would change. New tears came to his eyes and flowed down his cheeks. "Aiko, where are you?" "Hey guys, so, I was thinking this would help you guys a lot better, so here is a complete list of all the ships featured in this book and their songs, so I hope you enjoy. Edit. I forgot the character songs, so here's the completed list, so yeah. He nervous laughter. Ship songs. Izuku and Aiko, Where the Lonely Ones Roam by Digital Daggers, X. Happier by Marshmallow Foot Bastille, X. Katsuki and Izzy, I See Your Monsters Nightcore by Kaitai Sky, X. Just Hold On by Steve Aoki and Louis Tomlinson, X. Wolves by Selena Gomez and Marshmallow, X. Ash and Kaito, On My Own by Ashes Remain, X. Bang Bang by Kanon Foot Adam Levine, X. Kaminari and Shinso, There For You by Martin Garrix and Troye Sivan, X. Can't Sleep Love by Pentatonics, X. Character songs. Japanese Midoriya is Soldier by Nefex, X. Japanese Bakugu Ketsu, Fight Back by Nefex, X. Japanese Nakamura Aiko, Revolution by The Score, X. Japanese Nakamura Aiko, High Hopes by Panic. At the Disco, X. American Ash Thomas, Dangerous by Left Boy, X. Japanese American Thomas Kaito Thomas, Whatever It Takes by Imagine Dragons, X. American August Thomas, Burn It Down by Linkin Park, X. There are hints in the ship songs. Can any of you guess them? Hello everyone, and I have some very sad news. Due to personal health reasons, mental and physical, I cannot update this book, so it is placed on a temporary hold until I get better so I can perform my duties as an author correctly and efficiently. This really came as a hard blow for me because writing is my escape. It's what I do and who I am. Not being able to do it physically pains me to write or even say. I'm not going to disclose any reasons or clues as to what I have or why I have it, due to the fear that someone in my family or friend group is on here, and so I will tell you it's something that needs time and rest to heal from. That being said, I'll try to work on it when I get the chance, but I'm not certain as to when I'm going to be better. However, just know it's temporary and sheets. So that being said, try guessing the hints I left in the last AN, and if you guessed it right you actually get a bit of the scene the song inspired. That being said, good luck and stay witty guys. Hey guys, running_wild 829 here, and I am sorry for another AN, but I cannot complete the next chapter. The story will go on, but it's going to take a while. As you all know, I was sick for a long time. We figured out it was the flu and a respiratory issue and got it taken care of. However, last night took a turn for the worse. My friend had committed suicide a week ago and I'm just now getting word of it. He had said he wanted to kill himself, and I told him not to and tried to talk him out of it. The next day when I had asked him if he was okay, he sent me a video of a gun being loaded and a song about not wanting to live anymore. In a rush I had told him everything I liked about him and tried to talk him out of it only to not receive any texts afterwards. This brings me to this. If you are thinking about doing this, don't. I'm in so much pain, it physically hurts. Whatever you do, this is not the way out. This is the coward's way out, and no matter what you do, this is not it. I've been on the bad side of the fence and it got better with time. You leave family and friends who love you dearly behind. You have the power to save someone, and it's okay if you save yourself. No matter who you are in life, you are an inspiration to others. You need to help yourself. The suicide hotline is below. Please, if you feel this way, take the time to contact them below. I've lost a friend, I don't need to lose any of you. Suicide hotline, 1-800-237-8255. God bless and I love you all. Hey guys, Running Wild here, and my aunt committed suicide last night, so I'm gonna be away a lot longer than intended. I thought that I would start writing today, but so, I'm terribly sorry, but the book isn't my top priority right now. My aunt was only 4 to 5 years older than me, so it hit hard. I grew up with her and now she's gone. I hope you all understand, but right now isn't the time to be diving back into my book. I'm sorry, but I'm putting the book on a hiatus until further notice. Thank you for your support. God bless and I love you all. Hey guys, Running_Wild 829 here. So, I've pretty much recovered from everything, but not really. Confusing, yeah, but the following is what's going to happen. Lately, I've been slipping further and further from this work, and instead of having 20 full chapters, I'm ending the story with the next, compacting it all in one huge chapter. That being said, let me give you my reasons. Starting this work, 2 huge inspirations for this work left, and this being said, I want to start another book. So I'm going to hold a different vote. I've had many ideas, and only one is on the list from the last one. I will eventually get around to the Cafe Coffee Restaurant AU that had the most votes, but right now, I want to tie up loose ends with this Satri so I can start a new project, one that will honor both my aunt and friend's memory in doing it. So, that being said, I've been working on the chapter on Google Docs. Some of you might have found it already because I've gotten several requests for people to look at it. The rule with my docs is that they're open to the public after I release them, so if you want to read it, sorry but not happening. The chapter will be posted in January of New Year's Day for Americans. That being said, I'm sorry for the long wait, but I'm condensing everything into one chapter to finish it off. I really don't want to have loose ends with this book. Honestly, if you guys are angry, then just know I was contemplating about deleting it when my grandparents talked me out of it. I'm not going to forget. I actually have a reminder on my phone and I hate unfinished projects. That being said, here's the options for the next book with their descriptions. When you vote, put the number and ship along with the O. X4. Ship name. 1. Clance Spy AU. Keith Cogain was from the CIA division in the United States. A division that clashed with the FBI and many other agencies, the division conveniently named the Blade. On their mission code named Marmora, they run into a terrorist group named the Galra. Instead of blowing up buildings, the organization was taking to the streets and selling a deadly drug and replacing pills from many pharmacies with them. Keith is assigned on the case, skeptical of the lethal pills until it hits home and kills his parents. He spirals into a downward spiral and taken off the case and off the team. Forced to turn in his badge, Keith swears revenge when his older brother calls with a deal. Keith joins their vigilante group named Voltron and helps take down the Galra. Keith joins and is paired with a boy from Cuba that's a huge flirt with major insecurities, the wreck named Lance McLean. Will the two learn to work together, or will their mission go up in disastrous flames with a one-way ticket to a high-security prison? 2. Bakuga Zoo. In Hosa, Japan, there is a wonderful, magical place. Inside the Yui Zoo gates is a wonderful place to all who lay eyes upon it. A large snow-capped mountain, a moor, just so many different terrains all enclosed in the extremely large zoo. Each terrain has a special climate, with advanced technology that allowed -123 degrees Fahrenheit in a hot summer day. Of course, this probably doesn't interest you until you know the creatures kept there. Phoenix, dragons, hybrids, werewolves, mermaids and sirens, things of legends are there. Open to all whom enter. Of course, the zoo also has a dark side. A deep darkness that's going to swallow the mystical creatures whole if they don't rise above it. What darkness? Simple. The creatures aren't mating and aren't producing kids. 3. Blue Pulse Mafia. Bart Allen is Barry Allen's grandson, the Godfather's grandson to be clear. This wouldn't be a problem. The young boy of 18 could do as he deemed well pleased, until a new mafia began approaching into their city. Going against his grandfather's orders, he's captured by the rival family, the Light family. Thankfully, the Wayne family and Clark family joined with several others saved the boy, giving him another chance to live once more. However, a certain bodyguard by the name of Jamie Reyes perks his interest. For once in Bart's life, he felt something other than boredom. The question is the feeling lust or something more? Instead of abandoning or finishing it off, I'm gonna redo it because looking back this looks really rushed. So, look for a new work that's gonna be up on Christmas, New York's time. So, yeah, I'm terribly sorry but Izuku isn't who I wanted him to be and he seems like a scared little beach which isn't what I was going for. I think I rushed it just to get it over with. Now that I'm better, it seems really bad. So yeah, peace guys. Be careful, alright? A petite, long green-haired forest-eyed female hugged her curly-haired son who smiled at her. It's okay, mummy. It's just for the summer. The boy hugged the petite woman back and turned to his father, a tall, muscular, black curly-haired man with his hands in his jean pockets. We'll be fine, Inko. I know, Hisashi, but please, be careful. The man let a small smile onto his face. Alrighty, we gotta go to catch that All Might movie. He gives the female a small smile before turning to his son who's mumbling already about how cool the movie's gonna be. Ready, Squirt? His son lights up and Hisashi swears his heart melts. Yeah. Plus ultra. The boy brings his All Might figure to his chest and raises his fist in the air. There were explosions and the two adults turned to see Katsuki, Izuku's explosive blonde friend. Deku. Hisashi has to bite his tongue to keep himself from cussing at the blonde or backhanding the sheet out of him. Izuku doesn't look fazed, he just turns and smiles brightly at the other. Hisashi knows what his master speaks of when he says the next hero generation is weak, but also easily to turn to the other side. The black-haired male stands beside his son, a hand on his shoulder as he stares the little blonde-haired sheet. Hi Kaken. The blonde seems to stop, and Hisashi almost laughs as he sees the little boy sporting a small pink dust across his cheeks. He's not really crushing on Izuku and calling him that insulting name. Hisashi watches the interaction for 5 minutes before cursing under his breath. All Might movie right. Izuku, get in the car or we're gonna be late. Izuku nods and hugs the blonde quickly before running to the car, the explosive child threatening him as explosions went off in his hands. Hisashi turned to Inko who scolded Katsuki before hugging Hisashi. Despite having a son and divorce, they were good friends. Be safe. Hisashi huffed and rolled his eyes playfully at Inko. When am I not? With that last sentence, they parted ways. He got into a red sports car and sat snugly in the seat before looking back at Izuku. You buckled up? He asked as he started the car. Yes, Daddy. He smiled brightly. All right, let's go to that movie. They, however, would never make it. Okay, let me get this out of here. Void of Pain was going to be a series of different AUs and such, but since I'm rewriting, I decided to just redo the Flucking series and the AUs, so I have a set of 14 AUs and I wanted to know if you guys wanted to add any that you would like for me to do. So the series overall is going to start with Willing Whispers, which is a villain, assassin mercenary. Izuku Midoriya, and it starts off with Hisashi's viewpoint and in Chapter 3 it converts to Izuku's story. So yeah. So here's the list of the AUs that are going to be in the Life Willing series. So yeah, if you have any opinions on what AUs I should add, I'm all for it. I even have my Zoo AU in there as well, so no need to worry, that's definitely gonna be written up as the second or third book. My plan is that it's gonna take a year or two to finish the series, so I'll have something constant in my life, but I tend to rush and have no schedule whatsoever, so we'll see how this goes. Willing Whispers, Mercenary Assassin / Villain Thew. Willing Wounds, Mafia AU. Willing Legends, Zoo AU. Willing Dreams, Tribal AU, based off of Insane Marshmallow's idea that they posted on Tumblr at Insane Marshmallow. Willing Myths, mix of modern and siren AU, where it takes place in modern times in America where everyone says sirens aren't real, but then Kakin shows up. Willing Silence, Coffee Shop AU. I've literally been wanting to do these so much because my first job is actually going to be waitressing in a cafe restaurant, so yeah. Willing Promises, College AU. Honestly, I don't see many of these floating about. Willing Howls, Halloween AU, where Izuku is literally a Halloween ghost and Katsuki is a werewolf and so on. Willing Hearts, High School AU without quirks. Because, honestly, I see Katsuki as that jock and Izuku as the nerd. Willing Growls, Pet ABO AU. I've literally fallen in love with, so I'm really excited to be writing one of these. Willing Egos, believe it or not, I actually was going to write this before Void of Pain and make this my first BNA fanfic. It's a famous model. Izuku and Rockstar. Katsuki. Willing Stars, a god AU with Katsuki as the sun and Izuku as the earth, and they live among humans. Percy Jackson style without the demigods and such. Willing Sacrifices, Apocalypse AU based off of Kui on Tumblr. XXX. Willing Fire, Fantasy AU with Izuku as an elf and Katsuki as a dragon king, based off of the bonds that bind us by DM Megzi. So if I missed anything that you guys would like to see, then please comment what you would like it to be named and the AU you want. Like I stated above, I'm really wanting this to turn into a long series that would span over 2 years with like 20 chapters each if possible. Remember, Christmas 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time Willing Whispers will be out, and honestly, I am so excited to show you guys. It's amazing, and the first chapter is already 8,000 words long and I'm not even done. Thank you guys for sticking around with my crazy butt and reading my shitty book. I hope you guys are excited as I am. Willing Whispers is out now. Willing Whispers.